Let's begin with the foundations. Welcome to another lecture. Today we will consider Scott Pelley, an American broadcast journalist whose career, spanning more than 4 decades, helped define the field reporting ethos at CBS News and notably 60 Minutes. I am Professor Alexei, and with me as always is Priyanka, whose questions keep us honest and, if you will, awake to the obvious.
Hi everyone, thank you Professor. I'm Priyanka and I'm excited to learn more about how one person's reporting can shape public trust, and also what it takes to do that work under pressure.
To frame our discussion, Scott Cameron Pelley is fundamentally a reporter. He is also the author of Truth Worth Telling and became one of the most recognizable correspondents on 60 Minutes. In simpler terms, he is the person who goes to the scene in a war, or a disaster, or a White House briefing, verifies what is knowable, asks impolite questions politely, and then delivers the story in a voice that, as critics note, is calm and unflappable. Variety even linked his authority at the anchor desk to a ratings recovery at CBS Evening News.
So I guess we can start by thinking about roles. When we say correspondent, anchor, managing editor, and chief White House correspondent, what does that actually entail day to day? And also, what is 60 Minutes in the larger journalism ecosystem?
It's important to understand terms. 60 Minutes is the long-running CBS News magazine built on in-depth reporting and consequential interviews. A chief White House correspondent is the principal journalist assigned to cover the presidency and the West Wing. An anchor and managing editor, as Pelley was beginning June 2011, writes and delivers the nightly broadcast while shaping editorial standards and scripts. The managing editor title implies responsibility for verification and tone. Across these roles, Pelley stayed rooted in reporting. He covered the Gulf War from Baghdad. He investigated environmental and corporate wrongdoing. He interviewed figures from Ben Bernanke to James Comey to President Volodymyr Zelensky. And he accumulated, by the record, 51 National Emmy Awards, 4 DuPont Columbia Silver Batons, and 3 Peabody Awards, among others. These accolades signal peer recognition for sustained, high-stakes reporting. Moving forward, why should we care today? In an era when public trust in media is fragile, Pelley's method, praised by Andrew Tyndall as actual reporting rather than commentary, exemplifies the verification-first approach that can stabilize civic discourse. Margaret Sullivan described his Trump-era coverage as pointed truth-telling. That kind of clarity, devoid of punditry, becomes a public service when facts are contested in real time.
And I think the other reason is the pressure around editorial independence, right? With corporate mergers and internal politics, how do reporters like Pelley keep the work clean while navigating those controversies?
This brings us to some basic facts, beginning with 2 that are arguably surprising. First, in 2009, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, Pelley conducted the first televised interview in decades with a sitting Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke. This broke a long-standing tradition of opacity and signaled an institutional shift toward direct crisis communication. Second, he began in journalism at age 15 as a copy boy for the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. That early proximity to deadlines and verification habits seems to echo through his later work like a metronome in a Shostakovich scherzo.
Isn't it interesting how starting that young can set a lifelong rhythm? I often think that learning the basics of accuracy under pressure becomes a kind of muscle memory for journalists, like practicing dance footwork until it becomes instinct.
Next, let's explore 2 chronological anchors. In 1990 to 1991, Pelley reported on the Persian Gulf crisis and the Gulf War. including from Baghdad and with the 18th Airborne Corps, thereby establishing his credibility as a war correspondent. Then, from 2011 to 2017, he anchored and managed the CBS Evening News, adding in his first 9 months an average of 821,000 viewers per day. Critics credited his evidence-first, low-drama presentation with that expansion. Along the way, he also covered Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, demonstrating range beyond war zones. Before we get to the complexities, a personal note. As a mathematician by training, I admire the discipline of proof. Pelley's work, at its best, resembles a carefully constructed demonstration. Assumptions stated, evidence tested, conclusions proportionate. It is, to some extent, the same ethic in a different key, and one wishes more public arguments met that standard. Let's proceed to the next point. 3 big questions. First, what historical impact did Scott Pelley have as a war correspondent? Second, what if he had remained the CBS Evening News anchor beyond 2017? Third, how does corporate oversight shape journalistic integrity today? Big question 1. We observe that Pelley's war reporting begins in earnest in 1990 to 1991. From there, he reported in Afghanistan and Iraq, including front lines against ISIS. And in 2007, his work probed the civilian deaths in Haditha, Iraq, which earned a Peabody Award for rigorous pursuit of facts in wartime. In Darfur, in 2007, he enlisted a rebel group to conduct an armed reconnaissance that revealed a village destroyed by government forces. Ethically complicated, yes, but it produced material evidence that might otherwise have vanished. Decades later, in April 2022, he interviewed President Zelensky in Kiev during Russia's invasion, while the city was under siege. That segment exemplified immersive, high-risk accountability journalism. Historically, this body of work helped keep civilian impact, rules of engagement, and leadership accountability in public view. And it reinforced a standard that awards committees across the spectrum, from DuPont Columbia to Polk to Murrow, repeatedly recognized.
Building on that, I'm curious about the risks and ethics. When you embed with the military, or even, like in Darfur, move with a rebel group, how do you avoid becoming part of the story? And how do you weigh physical danger against the need to document atrocities?
It's crucial to understand the trade space. Embedded journalism offers proximity and primary source observation, but it risks dependence and perspective bias. The counterweight is triangulation, open acknowledgement of constraints, and seeking civilian and independent accounts. In Darfur, Pelley's armed reconnaissance is academically a liminal case. It created a security envelope that may have altered what could be seen, yet it yielded verifiable imagery of a destroyed village. The ethical calculus, as we in the research community would say, must include proportionality, transparency about methods, and a duty of care for all non-combatants encountered. In conclusion, the better war reporting is less about bravado and more about method. Document, corroborate, contextualize, and withdraw if your presence manufactures the scene you claim to observe. Big question 2. What if Pelley had remained CBS Evening News anchor beyond 2017? Counterfactuals are delicate. However, we can infer from empirical signals. Early in his tenure, the broadcast added substantial viewers, and critics like the Los Angeles Times praised his no-frills journalism-first style. Andrew Tyndall emphasized that he was doing reporting, not commentary. Margaret Sullivan described his pointed truth-telling in the Trump period. If he had stayed, we might expect continuity in evidence-centric scripts, perhaps sustaining or modestly growing trust among audiences fatigued by hot takes. Ratings trajectories would still face structural headwinds, fragmentation, streaming, but a consistent anchor ethos can serve as a trust anchor in itself.
Can we say that individual anchors really change how the public perceives the news? Or is it more that the institution sets the baseline and the anchor just personifies it? I guess I'm asking how much one person matters in a big system.
Speaking of systems, institutions set norms, copy editing standards, sourcing rules, corrections policies, yet the anchor is the visible guarantor of those norms. A trusted journalist can convert procedural rigor into audience confidence. It is mathematically a signal amplification problem. Pelley's restrained delivery, coupled with field reporting credibility, likely amplified CBS's verification culture. That said, personnel changes are often multi-causal. The public record on his 2017 removal is contested, with some citing ratings pressures, and Pelley later asserting he was removed after workplace complaints. Absent full documentation, we keep our conclusions appropriately probabilistic. Big question 3. How does corporate oversight affect journalistic integrity today? In April 2025, on 60 Minutes Last Minute, Pelley publicly said Paramount had begun supervising the show's content during a merger attempt. He added no stories had been blocked, but that the staff did not support such oversight. Variety described the on-air critique as rare. In June 2026, after sharp internal criticisms he directed at CBS News editor-in-chief Barry Weiss and new 60 Minutes executive producer Nick Bilton, Pelley was terminated for cause, per Bilton's letter obtained by the New York Times. Pelley then alleged leadership had instructed him to insert falsehoods and unverified assertions into a political story. His allegation remains unverified in the available record and is contested by leadership responses, including Weiss emphasizing newsroom trust and respect. The public record is contested, but the through line is a structural tension: corporate governance versus editorial autonomy. Even without explicit story blocking, supervisory practices can chill investigative appetite by shaping priorities and timelines.
To shift gears a bit, what are current best practices in newsroom governance that could reduce that chilling effect? Like, are there mechanisms that help editors and corporate leadership keep appropriate distance while still being accountable to owners and audiences?
To elaborate, guardrails include explicit editorial independence charters approved by boards, firewalls between sales, marketing, and news, transparent standards documents about sourcing and corrections, disclosure of potential conflicts, independent standards editors with veto authority on verification, protected internal reporting channels for ethical concerns, and where feasible, external advisory councils to review governance practices rather than content decisions. The principle is simple. Owners may set mission and resources, but editors must control facts, methods, and publication judgments. Transparency is the social contract that allows audiences to evaluate whether that boundary is respected. Absent it, trust decays, slowly at first, then suddenly, as Hemingway might note. In conclusion, Scott Pelley is an American broadcast journalist and author whose métier is rigorous on-scene reporting and consequential interviews. He served as CBS News chief White House correspondent, anchored and managed the CBS Evening News from 2011 to 2017, and became one of the most awarded correspondents in 60 Minutes history. We examined his historical impact as a war correspondent, a counterfactual about remaining anchor, and the live question of corporate oversight and editorial independence.
So I guess that kind of sums it up. For further study, maybe look closely at investigative journalism practices that sustain credibility under pressure, like verification workflows and transparent corrections. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Professor.
This then completes our present analysis. We appreciate your attention. Until next time, stay curious and verify twice.